Hello, this is Jester, and welcome to the circus. Have you ever felt like your own worst enemy? Like no matter how hard you try, something inside you is holding you back. Maybe it is fear, maybe it is self-doubt, or maybe it is just the weight of everything you have been carrying for far too long. Everyone has a mountain to climb. For some, it is a dream they have been chasing. For others, it is a fear they have been avoiding. Everyone has their own story to live. And just like every story needs a villain in order to move the story further along, each of us individually has a villain in our own lives as well. But unlike movies, where most of the villain is someone else, sadly, this is far from the truth when it comes to our own lives. Most often, the most villainous of acts done to us in our everyday life are not by someone else, but instead, we are the very source of this villainy. We ourselves are the instigator. Everyone struggles in their own lives. The blessed struggle with the world. The cursed struggle with their own selves. The idea of the villain within is universal. We are often our own worst critiques, sabotaging our progress with fear and hesitation. And more games, especially indie games, have took up the mantle to tackle these tasks. Celeste is another one of those gems. It is a beautiful game that tackles the question of one's own struggle, not just with the world around, but most importantly, the personal struggles of having to live with the memories of not only how we ourselves are the creator of our own misery, but also the biggest hurdle that one has to eventually deal with in order to come to terms with the change that life seemingly demands so one can move forward. It has been a very long time since I have tackled a game that on the surface is seemingly so simple, with very little story to tell and even fewer lines of text, and yet is so poignant in its presentation that when Madeline, our main protagonist, meets Theo, another character that is also climbing the mountain, their conversation hit such a core within me that it was enough for a grown-up man like me to get teary-eyed. And even when I was writing this script, I felt a strong surge of emotions, thinking about what the game has overall left me with. But before I move further along, let me give a very short synopsis of what the game is all about. The game starts off with our protagonist Madeline, who seemingly has decided to take on the task of climbing a mountain. Once a very small tutorial is finished, we meet an unknown old lady on the outskirts of the mountain, and after a small conversation with her, she in a roundabout way tells Madeline that climbing the mountain is going to be a perilous task. And this is where the game finally starts. There are, at least on the surface, 7 main chapters. In each chapter, there are a certain number of strawberries the player can try to get, a crystal heart, and a hidden cassette tape that unlocks the B-side of the chapter you get the cassette tape from. There are also chapter 8 and 9 as part of the DLC, but I wouldn't be talking about it since I haven't played them. But moving further along, even though the mechanics of the game, like the story, are very simple, you can jump, you can dash, and you can most importantly latch onto the walls, these 3 mechanics are taken to its absolute extremity. And what one can do with these skills is almost limitless. That is where the fun part comes in. The game is very fun, even though it's very simple. Most often, games nowadays can't actually get this part right, but this indie game actually does so. From here onwards, my main focus would be on why I think Celeste and other games like Celeste, when it comes to difficulty, for example Dark Souls, there is your weekly reference of calling a game Souls-like, are so crucial to the current landscape of gaming. I would be honest with you, I am not really into extremely hard games. Even though as a child I played games like Mario and Contra, I never finished them. Even growing up, the games I would mostly play would fall into the category of mainstream media. Games such as Call of Duty, Battlefield, Counter-Strike, Killzone, Halo. These games were absolutely great, but they weren't challenging in the sense games like Celeste are. Behind its simplistic pixel art style and gameplay loop, there is hidden very deep meanings and skills. You know how sometimes some things make you question your very own ability and what your limits might be? Celeste definitely falls into such category. But just like a rough diamond, its brilliance is only out in the open once one truly starts chipping away at it. The story of Madeline is simply the age-old story of an individual's struggle with oneself. But even if these story arcs have been repeated countless number of times in countless other mediums, Celeste has beautifully, in a very simple way, portrayed its message of coming to terms with oneself and being in unity with the self in such a poignant way that it can't be replicable in any other medium, such as movies, because Madeline's story is not her story alone, it is the story of the player as well. When we watch a movie, we have no direct control over the outcome of the characters, and so are always one step away from them. But video games are an exception. We as the player are directly in control of the character whose story we are about to experience. So Celeste, because of this, is able to tell us the story in two ways. One is through interactions with other characters, and other is its gameplay. It is the gameplay part that beautifully ties up the whole story of Celeste. For even though topics of struggle with oneself, whether it be anxiety, self-doubt, depression, loneliness, etc., are universal and have been portrayed in countless other mediums, be it movies or books, it is the gameplay that really makes you appreciate the message the game tries to teach. For the struggle of moving along further ahead in the story, the player themselves has to struggle and persevere. And this touch of difficulty that the player experiences elegantly ends up becoming very personal for the player. Even though all of the topics that Celeste talks about are universal, tying it with the gameplay immediately makes the player feel much more connected. For they are struggling not only with the same emotions that Madeline is struggling with, but also the same task that Madeline is struggling with, the task of climbing the said mountain. From the very start, the context of Madeline doing something that is seemingly way out of her comfort zone, simply because she wants to challenge herself, is something very admirable. There are more number of stories that have ended before they even had a start, compared to those that did, and even more so compared to those that had an end. Journey of 1,000 steps starts with a single step, but most often the journey never even starts, so taking that single step already ends up becoming a hurdle. You yourself must have countless ideas, things, dreams, goals that you would like to achieve, but most often we don't even take a step to start towards it, let alone persevere. So from the very beginning, Madeline acts as the outcast to all of the rules of society, wisdom, safety, and comfort, and all of it simply because her heart wants to finally do something. The goal of climbing the top of the mountain, while is still there in her mind, what is even more important for Madeline is that she attempts this perilous task. And my God, has today's generation stopped attempting things they truly wanted. Having finished Celeste, I can definitely see the charm of games that require a very specific level of skill set in order to finish such games. The most benefit I can see from a perspective of a psychology graduate is that these games teach one very specific thing, a skill called perseverance. I can't tell you what makes someone successful, but one skill that is 100% required is perseverance. No task, no human undertaking, no achievement, no goal, no dream is achieved if one doesn't continue to try and work towards something even when it is difficult or takes a long time. It is not to say that every game needs to be extremely difficult, but like sweet and spicy, each taste has its own place in its own recipe. Sometimes one might be in the mood for sweets, but other times for something spicy. But nonetheless, in this case, I think having a varied experience is a must for individuals of today's generation to have some sense of what it means to stick by and continue towards something that seems difficult in order to achieve that said task. And that is simply because today's generation avoids feelings and emotions that they aren't comfortable with. Today's generation either has too much time and ends up procrastinating, or too little time to even think openly about what sort of life one wants to live. There is no in between. Look at one particular task that is the real pandemic of our generation: scrolling reels or stories on YouTube and Instagram. It is such a waste of time, and yet most individuals fall into it. There is zero skill required, nothing really gained out of it, and yet it is like a silent addiction that everyone seems to be having in their life. And it is no wonder that the mainstream media, whether it be video games, movies, social media, is full of clickbait, overly exaggerated speech, suggestive content, knowledge about topics that you have very low probability of ever using, and God knows what other things. They dull your mind, but if you ever take the moment to ask yourself why you allow your life to be wasted doing such things, you would realize it is because most often you are afraid to act. Everything in existence depends upon moderation. and that includes indulgence in suffering. It is why I think difficult games like Celeste are very important. They are definitely way out of our comfort zone for most average gamers, but this barrier of entry also acts as a meaningful one. What these difficult games teach the player are way more directly applicable as a skill in real life than, say, finishing a Call of Duty campaign or watching a movie. One can come to terms with their emotions eventually if they try hard enough. But what is even more difficult is coming to terms with our inability or lack of ability in the current moment. Maybe you want to pick up something finally that you always wanted, but unlike Madeline, you would end up really taking the step forward because it is out of your comfort zone, because it requires you to persevere to get any good at it. Difficult games not only make you feel uncomfortable, but if you persevere, they also teach you about this uncomfortable feeling and what it means to tackle challenges. For life is not easy. It is much harder than these games and demands all of your being. But difficult games at least give you a glimpse of all of the emotions that you suppress in your everyday life. The anxiety, the rage, the anger, the feeling of being stuck, feelings of complexity whenever you undertake a new unknown task. But most importantly, a glimpse at what one feels if one perseveres, sticks by in order to see how the story unfolds. For in my opinion, the reason most people are fine with mediocrity and allow social media and other consumer mediums to dull one's ambitions, passions and drive to achieve something that one has always wanted out of their lives is simply because all of these emotions and feelings come out of difficulty. But the lifestyle we are being shown everywhere only shows you the good parts. It never shows you that you can't have it unless you have these emotions. Instead, they have become a tool to suppress these uncomfortable feelings whenever the reality of our own lives slowly starts showing its face. Whenever it starts creeping, most of us just pick up our phone and start scrolling, giving us the false sense of security that you have those things. Things that you see whenever you are scrolling on the internet, but you don't. You didn't come out into this world to waste it on watching other people do the things you always wanted to do yourself. So I would like to end the video by reading a passage from Alan Watts. Now I know the word discipline isn't very popular these days, and I would like to have a new word for it, because most people who teach discipline don't teach them very well. They teach it with a kind of violence, as if a discipline was something that is going to be extremely unpleasant, and you are going to have to put up with it. But that is not the real secret of discipline. I would prefer to use the word skill. And discipline is a way of expression. Say when you get to express your feelings in stone. Now stone doesn't give away very easily. It is tough stuff. So you have to learn the skill of the discipline of the sculptor in order to express yourself in the stone. And so in every other way, whatever you do requires a skill. And it is enormously important, especially for American people, to understand that there is absolutely no possibility of having any pleasure in life at all without skill. Money doesn't buy pleasure. And the extremely sad part is, most of us don't even have money. Forget pleasure. We live paycheck to paycheck. So go play Celeste or some other game that actually challenges you. And then remember what you felt when you overcame the challenge. And then go ahead and start dealing with the challenges of life while you remind yourself of both the experiences you had when you were challenged and the emotion you had when you overcame the challenge, and then tackle your life head on without leaving it on tomorrow.